Why is it negative? Is it negative because of the way you grew up, because you heard your parents argue about money, or you were told, no, we can't afford that, or, oh, they're rich, they're bad, what? And usually once those questions are asked and you can kind of reflect on it, you can come to the conclusion pretty quickly why you feel the way you do about it. Mm-hmm. And then acknowledge it, right? Sit in it for a minute and acknowledge it. But then we have to work to set it aside, because money isn't positive or negative. It is what it is. Yeah. It's us humans that put this emotion on it.
Your relationship with money matters. I'm Michelle Perkins, and this is the Money and You podcast, where I will be breaking down your relationship with money, offering tough love money tips, and a money dating plan that will focus on lifting the barriers to success to help pave the way for better money practices and increased wealth. It's time to take control to live a limit-free life. It starts today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Money and You Show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host. I'm so happy that you're here today listening to the show. We have a great show scheduled for you today. We're going to focus on some younger folks today and money, and among other things. But I have a wonderful guest today that I'm going to introduce to you, and then she and I are going to get started, and I know you're going to love this conversation. So I'm going to introduce you to Shari Rash. I'm so sorry. I've already mispronounced it. Shari Rash is the founder of GWA Wealth, a virtual financial advisory firm that helps millennials and Gen Z families address financial challenges and questions in a fun, comfortable, no-nonsense way. She's a financial advisor, host of Money CHIC podcast, and author of Insider Secrets About Women and Money. Over her 17-year career, she's seen how the lack of financial education and communication about money has negatively affected her generation. She's working to undo the taboo about money. She's a mom of five including her golden doodle, Flash Rash, loves grand millennial decor, and spends way too much time in her minivan driving her kids to their many activities. And oh, how I miss the minivan and the kids and the activities. So enjoy it. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
I am too. And it's so, there's so much synchronicity all the time. This is a subject that actually is about to come up with another guest and on millennials. And there's a lot to talk about with the different, generations. And I'm older, and I used to think that money was money regardless of the generation, but I've really come to see how different it's really different now from one generation to another, and increasingly, as we go along. So anyway, I love this conversation that we are about to have. So do you want to give us a little background on yourself? We know a little bit. I'm always so impressed when people have more than two kids, because I managed to have two, but any more than that always seemed like a lot.
Well, I guess I cheated because I went from 2 to 4. So I didn't stay in that 3-child area. I went straight from 2 and then had twins. So I jumped to 4, which was quite a jump. I was already driving a minivan at that time, and my daughter, who was about 6 or 7, one of her first reactions when I said, "Mommy's going to have 2 babies," she said, "Good, now we're going to use all the seats in the minivan." Yes. That is one way to think of it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I do miss the minivan. And I have a 23 and a 26-year-old. So you look back on those days, and boy, you'd give a lot to have one of those back. So anyway.
Yeah. So I started my career, I was always in financial services, but then I did graduate college with the goal of being a financial advisor. So I got my licenses, I did all of that, and then I'm a financial advisor. I put my stake in the ground, and it turns out people are not just bending over backwards to give a 22-year-old fresh out of college their life savings. So it was a big surprise. I was shocked. But I then took a little bit of a pivot, and I worked with product companies, financial companies representing the products, and then actually working with financial advisors to understand their business, how they work with their clients, what products and needs their clients have. And so I represented companies for about 13 years of my career, traveling the country, talking with advisors. But I still had that nagging voice in the back of my head saying, Shari, this isn't exactly what you wanted to do. You love what you do, but this wasn't the plan. And that's when I created my firm, GWA Wealth. And then I focused on helping people like me, millennials, young families trying to figure out how to do all of this, and also help women, because I feel that we're all underserved in the financial services industry. So that's really what I seek to do.
That's beautiful. And I agree. Women, are underserved. I had this whole conversation with my son about this, because at 26, you have a different perspective. I mean, I came up through a time when women really were at a disadvantage. He doesn't see that as much with his peers. And so we were talking all about that. But in the end, there was, I think I had enough evidence to show that it still exists. But so I love that you're doing that. I love that you do financial education, because that is severely lacking. We got into the whole discussion too about why that is. Why is there really a little bit of an edge when it comes to financial education with boys versus girls? And so, maybe we'll get into that a little bit too, because that still exists. So.
Absolutely. I mean, just our biases, our natural biases. I mean, when we spoke before, women weren't able to have their own bank accounts or credit cards or mortgages until the 70s, which that wasn't that long ago. So even if it doesn't exist today, and your son or my kids aren't necessarily seeing the difference between men and women or boys and girls in their relationship with money today, it still is kind of ingrained in us, in the back of our minds, because it wasn't that long ago that women couldn't make financial decisions on their own.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I don't know if people really recognize the significance of that. These things do get passed down for quite a while until they're somehow erased. But so what are you, there's a lot of talk about the millennials and the accumulation of wealth by millennials and all kinds. What's happening with millennials right now?
Honestly, it kind of depends on what millennial you're talking to.
Yeah.
I think we all can have kind of a very different experience depending on when you graduate college and where you are in your life. If you graduated college with debt or without debt, if you were working during 2008, I mean, especially elder millennials, when they first started working, they saw a huge financial crisis and market crash in 2008. And then we experienced, when it kind of felt like we were starting to really get our footing in adulthood, we then had COVID and all the reactions to that, the domino effect of COVID on our pocketbooks, on our lives. And now we're past that, but we're still kind of recovering, because many millennials are looking to buy houses, or for the first time, which is kind of unheard of, that the average age to buy a house last year was 38 years old, which,
wow.
that just sounds so old, looking at past history. So it really depends on who you're talking to and what their experience has been. But at the end of the day, what generally speaking with millennials is life is really expensive. Housing's expensive. Student loan debt is high. So we're trying to navigate all of these things with kind of these headwinds. We're still trying to become successful and manage our money and make the right decisions and start a family, but we have these major headwinds coming at us. So it's difficult. It certainly is difficult.
Yeah. I was growing up with the message that, well, it was such a simple message, go to college, get a good job, work your way up, buy a house, have a family. It's all going to come together perfectly. And so now, with the millennials on, the messaging is very different. There's also more avenues for the messaging to come into your head. Again, I didn't have any social media at that time or anything, but So I feel like there's a lot of negative, scary messaging about you'll never buy. I mean, my daughter actually, who's a Gen Z, the other day, I mean, first thing in the morning, woke up, opened her eyes, and called me into a room to tell me about her worries about never being able to buy a house. And, where is my family going to live? I mean, we are in Southern California, so she looks at real estate all the time. She can't imagine being able to afford it. So I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts just about the impact of all the kind of negative news that is hitting everybody?
There's so much negative news, and but that also is what sells, right? So our news outlets have no choice but to position everything in a negative way, because that seems to get our attention. When you're writing a blog, for example, negative subject lines get people's attention more than positive subject lines. So news outlets are kind of trained to start off with the negative information, because that's what people tend to gravitate towards. So we're getting hit with it all the time, but it's, you can Google things. We can look everything up. We can research forever, right?
Right.
But until you're able to take that information, actually apply it to your life or apply it to you personally, that's kind of the changing point. That's the tipping point to say, okay, well, how does this actually impact me? For example, your daughter saying, I'm never going to be able to buy a house. Is that only because of what she's reading, or when we actually put pen to paper and look at the facts, then, but it's finding that trusted resource, I think, that can help you weed through all the noise to actually understand how do current events or situations impact you in a real way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm a big believer in getting away from the news, honestly, and there are things that don't tend to, I mean, again, when you're looking at things like buying a house, I never found that buying a house was a comfortable thing. It was always a stretch, from the first one. I've been through a few of them, but never did I feel like, oh, this is going to be easy, no big deal. And you just kind of go into it. You're usually kind of sick to your stomach and worrying about it. So it's usually a stretch. What do you tell people who are interested, maybe, back to the millennials for sure, but, do you think the reason that the average age for, buying a home moved up so much were the events that had happened during the millennials' life, or is it more like, a deficiency in earnings, or what do you think it is?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, when student loan debt, obviously millennials are highly educated, but that also means that we have high student loan debt. So when you have a student loan payment that can be as much as a mortgage, well, you can't afford two mortgages then, right? You're not going to be able to, the student loan, which feels like a mortgage, and then an actual mortgage.
Right.
So I think that's one part of it. I think another part may be kind of not wanting to settle. So renting gives the flexibility of living anywhere you want. So more flexibility in your job or where you live. Maybe not wanting to go home yet and buy, where you grew up and wanting to buy a home there. So I think, obviously buying a home feels very permanent, and that might be a psychological hurdle that many millennials face. So I think it's a combination of things. It also not ever feeling ready to, because it is such a big step. But I think it also comes down to that money is often not talked about. And you're 100% right. Buying a house or making a big financial decision never feels great, right? It's a hurdle. It makes your stomach hurt a little bit. It's scary. And so often we don't talk about money, so we are left to kind of our own feelings about it.
Yeah.
And if we're not money experts, quote unquote, then we're never going to be totally comfortable. Well, if I'm not totally comfortable, then it must not be right then, and I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think there's so many reasons why, but I think one of the biggest things is coming down to financial education, or the lack thereof, that many people don't have that financial education to feel confident in their decisions.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And I wanted to ask you, I thought I'd start asking my guests this, but, I talk a lot about your relationship with money as well as practical things about money, because I think the two of them are so intertwined. But how do you see your own relationship with money? I mean, is it different now than it used to be? Has it evolved some? How is it?
Yeah. I just had a career day with my 13-year-old daughter. She's in 7th grade, and I was talking to them about how I became an advisor, and I realized that I've always enjoyed talking about money, which that's so taboo. You can't talk about money. But I've always enjoyed it. And I asked the kids to think about their first money memory, or like, do your parents talk to you about money? And so many of them knew a lot of personal finance stuff, which I was so encouraged by. And they have a financial literacy course at school, which they seem to have learned a lot from that. Yeah. And so that was really, really encouraging. But I asked them, try to think back when you're really young, like, what is your first money memory? And I shared with them mine, and I was about their age. And I had a little job. I was a toast girl. My dad told me that I spent, not that I was getting cut off, but, if you want to buy all of your trinkets and stuff, you need to go get a job because this bank is starting to close on you. So my mom took me around. We lived in a beach vacation town and she took me around to all the restaurants and, hey, can you hire her? And I was too young. And one of the last restaurants we went to just made up a job on the spot. Yeah, she can make toast for us for breakfast. And I went, and my first shift, I got paid hourly. And then the servers tipped me out, which I was not expecting.
Nice.
So I just came home with gobs of money, like just handfuls of money, and taking it out of the little apron that they wear, taking it out of the apron. And I would take my money and put it on my bed and organize it. And I wasn't spending it quickly enough, so it was accumulating. And that really helped to create my relationship with money, that it was like, I can see it. I have different piles. Each pile means something different. And that essentially changed my life. That put me on the trajectory that I'm on now, in that I saw how it can be a tool, and using it, when you use it the right way, it's so beneficial, but finding a way that also works for you. So that is kind of, money's always been kind of talked about in my house. Never like, this is how much I make and this is how much I have. And that's what I feel like people only associate money conversations with, talking about how much you have.
Yeah.
And that's not it at all. I mean, we use it every day. We need it to survive. There's more to money talk than just personal information, right?
Yeah.
So I know my dad always talked about the stocks that he had and all of that. So it was always part of the conversation in my house. And I think that's what made me comfortable with money.
Oh, I love that. It sounds like it was a pretty healthy money environment that you had, which is a wonderful thing. And I love that you brought up the fact that when we talk about money, we feel somehow like compelled to talk about what we make and, what things in our life cost. And I actually think, especially with kids, that's the one place you kind of don't want to go. I mean, because they can't put it in context. They don't know what any of it means. It might sound like you're rich. It might sound like, you've got real problems. And in there, as we know, kids make up all kinds of ideas in their head about a lot of things. And so, until you really understand things, I don't know that those numbers are meaningful, and they could, in fact, be scary. But the fact that your dad was investing, I remember my dad too, before internet, getting the stock graphs in the mail and sitting, after dinner and looking over those things, but he enjoyed it. It was like a fun hobby, and so I think the way you're speaking about money is in a very upbeat, positive, good way. And so I think if people can understand that it can be that, because I think for so many people, they don't talk about money because money also, just money as a general topic is giving them a giant stomach ache, and they don't know what to do, and they don't feel like they're in a good place. And, it's a lot, and it's like talking about anything really negative in your life. You kind of just want to avoid it.
Right. And why is it negative? Is it negative because of the way you grew up? Because you heard your parents argue about money, or you were told, no, we can't afford that, or, oh, they're rich, they're bad, what? And usually once those questions are asked and you can kind of reflect on it, you can come to the conclusion pretty quickly why you feel the way you do about it. Mm-hmm. And then acknowledge it, right? Sit in it for a minute and acknowledge it. But then we have to work to set it aside, because money isn't positive or negative. It is what it is. Yeah. It's us humans that put this emotion on it. And the emotion can be good or bad. And oftentimes it does tend to get negative. And we have to acknowledge why it's negative, and kind of try to push that aside. And is that because I feel like I never have enough? Well, what is enough? Or that enough is not a number, right? And if you feel like enough, you're never going to get there because you can't quantify it. So there's so many ways to kind of narrow down or nail down why you feel a certain way you do about money, and acknowledge it. But at the end of the day, it's us putting our emotions on it. The number on a page is a number. It's not bad or good, positive or negative. It is what it is. So if you acknowledge it and have some excitement about it, or what it can do for you, or change your life, that's when you start to create that positive money environment for yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And it certainly can do things for you that are really positive in your life. And that is oftentimes not the way people think about it. So when you're working with clients, it's obviously part of your job to help them see that and open up the possibilities for them. Let's just circle back for a minute to this buying homes kind of late. Is that necessarily a negative? Because there are arguments out there that, there's an argument you shouldn't buy a home at all. There are arguments that, so as you were talking before, I'm like, maybe that's just the way we would do things back in the day. But financially, is it really important to buy a house as soon as you can?
Well, that's funny, because just like we put our own feelings on money, we put our own feelings on buying a home. Or owning a home, or having our own home, quote unquote. Mathematically speaking, it's probably one of the worst things you can do.
I actually love that answer so much. Take that back to my daughter.
It's so expensive.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense, but we put our own emotions on it, right? I don't want to live in someone else's house, or I don't want to pay someone else's mortgage, or I want something that's mine. So, and like you said before, we do what we're told. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to buy a house. Okay, we're going to buy a house. And so no, I don't think it's a bad thing to buy a home late, especially if you're buying a home when you feel like you're still kind of in moving mode, or you're not completely settled down. It may not make much sense at all to buy a home. I've moved quite a few times in my adult life, and it's expensive every single time. Even when you think you have all the furniture, the furnish, everything, it's still really, really expensive. So no, I don't think it's a bad thing at all that the median first-time buyer age went up.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting for people to hear. And I also, in my head is the ancient message, when you're paying rent, you're flushing money down the toilet. But do you want to counter that with something a little bit different? Like, what can you do when you're renting?
Right. I mean, when the dishwasher breaks, when the washer goes, someone else's money is fixing it, right? Or someone else is fixing it, right? So, no, and it's giving you a place to live. So at the end of the day, you're paying to rest your head somewhere, and you can still put down roots even if you're paying rent versus a mortgage. So no, I mean, it makes complete sense. It's our emotions that get in the way of, no, I need to buy. But think of all the things that go into home ownership, it is so expensive that renting has you avoid doing all of those things. So it's
right. And what are the alternatives for people if you decide, you'll rent a little longer, forever, whatever your decision is? What should they be doing with their money? Because the one thing you do want is to have money working for you. So how would you do that?
Right. So obviously having a rent that fits in with your overall household spending, your income. But then with that, and even when you're buying a house, making sure you still have income that's coming into you through your paycheck that can still be set aside towards goals, whatever those goals may be. So obviously retiring one day, right? It's funny, we start working and the day one of our job, we have to start thinking about retiring. But retiring one day, paying for your kids' education, traveling, whatever it is you want to do, we need to make sure that you're saving for that. So if your money's not going into the equity of your home, which is completely illiquid, right? When we do it, we're told we buy a house, we build equity, and then we save for retirement, except those are two pretty much illiquid sources until we sell that home or we retire. So making sure that you are investing and saving in a way that you can access and enjoy prior to retirement or selling your home. But having goals in mind, what do you want to achieve? And then kind of working backwards. But making sure that your necessities don't take up, too much of your paycheck. And my rule of thumb I use with my clients is keep it at about 50% of your household income, net income, paycheck income. Keep it at about 50%. That way you still have plenty of money to do the things that make life better, right? All that extra stuff. And then so you're still able to save for your goals and your dreams and what you want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And what do you say to people who do live in a little more expensive cities than others? I mean, is there a difference there, or how do you?
I mean, it's sometimes we can't sometimes control where we live, right? It's where our job is, it's where we grow up, it's where our family is, and it can be more expensive. But then also conversely, if you're working there, your wage might also be higher too, in comparison to another part of the country. But I would just say, just keeping it in mind, my rule of thumb is keeping about 50% of your take-home income for your needs, 30% for your wants, 20% for your wishes. Wishes are our future goals, stuff that our future selves would thank us for, that we set aside money today on. So paying down debt, saving, retirement, college, vacations, all of those things. So you want to make sure you still are setting money aside. Now, if you live somewhere more expensive, 50% may not be realistic. It may be closer to 60, 70%. And that's okay, as long as we make the adjustments in the wants category and still, we're still making a habit of saving for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what do you see with the millennials with respect to retirement? Is there, you see the FIRE movement people who want to retire by 30 or whatever. I don't really get that, honestly, but I'm like, part of me is just like, well, what are you going to do with your life? But in some cases I get it, some cases not. Anyway, but what is there? Can you generalize that at all? I mean, are they thinking about retirement the way my generation did? Are they thinking about it working longer? I mean, what do you see?
Again, it's hard to generalize, so I can use kind of my experiences with my clients, but unfortunately, it feels unattainable. It feels like it's so far. One, it's so far away, but it's not. And two, you need so much money in order to retire, that's where, again, $1 million to one person is completely different and has different purchasing power than $1 million to someone else, right? So breaking away from, well, you need to have X amount of dollars in order to feel comfortable retiring. Instead, what do we want it to look like, and kind of work backwards from there. Millennials too, are very entrepreneurial. Mm-hmm. So retiring is not necessarily part of the conversation. It's, well, how can I kind of stop working for the man, if you will?
Yeah.
So becoming more independent as far as our income goes, or our future income streams go.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating point because, it's kind of, the millennials are converging. They'll be retiring at a time when there's never been more opportunity to be an entrepreneur with ease, really. So, I think that's a real blessing. It does take a little of the boot off your neck when you're thinking about retirement too. Like, it isn't just about having enough savings to be able to do it, because you can still generate income, hopefully, if you're healthy. So, I think that's a very interesting difference, probably from millennials going forward. I mean, through Gen X and Gen Z. Is there a difference that you can identify and talk about briefly with respect to those, those two generations as well? They always talk about Generation X being kind of like left out of the conversation entirely. Are they really any different than millennials? I don't know. I haven't kept up.
Gen X is kind of just looked over.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Talk about the baby boomers, the millennials, and then there's the Gen Xers. And the Gen Xers are the ones taking care of the baby boomers and the millennials. But
poor generation.
But, yeah. So, I mean, that's a real concern too. It's very legitimate and they call it the sandwich generation for a reason, right? I mean, could there be a household where there's 3 generations living in it, because we're caring for our parents and we have our young children still with us. So that's a real concern. And it's, again, but it's looking at it, family by family, as far as our individuals, based on what their current situation is and really how to address it. But it's been said, and some research has shown, that generation after millennials are actually even more conservative, financially conservative, than millennials are, because they kind of see the mistakes millennials have made, and they're like, I'm not even doing that. Like, they have no idea what they're doing or what they're talking about. So they're uber financially conservative, which will be exciting to see. It'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. What are some examples of how millennials have not been conservative?
Well, I think, the student loan that's a real issue, right? And I mean, that's not being irresponsible, or it is what it is, right? I mean, you go to college, you get your job. We followed the rules, right?
Right.
And we have loans as a result. But, when I went to college, there was minimal education, financial education. We would walk from class to class, building to building, and there would just be tables set up with credit card companies. If you sign up for a credit card, you get T-shirts.
Yeah, I know. On them. That was really not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and so we had, generally speaking, I like the dumb saying on this shirt, let me sign up for a credit card. And the damage that can do, and, and building up debt and bankruptcy, or just student loans for non-educational reasons. Or I had a acquaintance that took out student loans for clothes, just for extracurricular activities. I mean, that's unfortunate. But that comes down to a lack of education and knowledge, and unfortunately kind of being taken advantage of.
Well, people were, I mean, I've talked to people and I've been shocked about as far as how much they were taken advantage of. I mean, offered student loans that they took, especially if their parents weren't really involved and they were kind of doing it on their own. And they were really taken advantage of. I mean, terrible loans at terrible rates with terrible terms. And nothing, they weren't government loans. They were private loans from private banks or whatever. And they were, I mean, some of them I've just been shocked that anybody, and the person, the young student taking this loan out has really no idea they just need money for school, and they want to go, and because they want to better themselves and they want to have a future. So I find that to be pretty disgusting, actually.
Yeah.
So, and there was a lot of that.
I remember having a conversation with a girlfriend and, she was telling me about, oh yeah, I had to go, re-up my student loan, take out more. And they're like, well, you're going to be living in an apartment. Take it. Then let's tie that cost into loan. Let's tie this in a loan, that in a loan, and they just jammed it full of all these expenses that they're telling you you're going to have. And then, oh, well, don't worry about it. You're not going to have to worry about it till after you're finished grad school, right? I mean, just, go to grad school and you'll have to put the rhetoric that was fed to us. It really was disturbing at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really, and again, the fact that people don't talk about money that much meant that this magical, like after grad school time, like people weren't clear on what they might be earning, or how quickly they'd get a job or anything. And so you're kind of banking on this idea that there's going to, and I think the banks perpetuated it by sort of encouraging you, after you get your first job, everything's going to be, you'll just pay it all back. Well, nobody really did the math on that either to see what a first job might pay in your field. And I actually just, a former client of mine is a teacher at an art school, and she said that particular art school here in LA now has a thing where either upon admission or exit, I can't really remember, I think it's upon admission, that it's all explained to them. Like when you get out, here are the possibilities for jobs. Here's what you might make. And, here's your tuition. And let's really see, like, if this is going to are you going to be okay? Because people are looking for an ROI from school. And
sure, of course, right? Mm-hmm. That's why we do it, right? That's why we went to school, to get a good job, but if not, not even talking about how expensive it is just to live now, but then having these astronomical loans on top of it, it really is, it handcuffs you in order to build for your future. You kind of feel like you're on a hamster wheel. Yeah.
And sadly, it's been so hard. And I kind of feel like the millennial generation was the first one that really got in either the costs had gone up or, the loans were more prevalent or both or whatever. But it was a much steeper hill to climb, I think, for your generation than ones in the past. I mean, I had a student loan. It was not that big a deal. But the flip side of that is I hear a lot of my daughter's peers talking about, well, I'm not going to go to school because it's so expensive. And, I'm not going to do that to myself or my parents or anybody. So it's kind of a negative impact that way, too, of people feeling like school isn't even worth it. So I don't know.
And I think it comes down to the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. I think you summed it up very nicely in the beginning when you said, I did as I was told. You do as you're told, right? Yeah. You get a job, you buy a house. So you do as you're told. We went to college. You want a good job, you go to college. Okay, you go to, and so we did all of these things. So we followed the rules, right? Mm-hmm. But we're not sure if those rules are helping us or hurting us. And now your daughter's generation is now going, well, does this make sense for me? Let's weigh the pros and cons versus just following the rules, which is interesting. So they're kind of learning, they're taking lessons from, those before you.
Right. So as an advisor, I wish we could have more time, but I'd love to know some advice that you give people about who are coming to you with a significant amount of student loan debt, but still wanting to, improve their financial situation and everything else. I mean, are there some tips you can offer?
I think, not building in to your spending strategy. I don't like the word budget. If you ever listen to my podcast or my blogs, I hate the B word. It's just so restrictive.
I know.
I don't say it. I call it a spending strategy.
Yeah.
Building in the spending strategy of we have the student loans, we have a debt, whatever it is, and we need to work to get rid of it. Understanding how does your dollar work harder? Does your dollar work harder by paying extra to a debt or by being invested? And so understanding, using the money as a tool, removing the emotion from it, but using it as a tool to achieve what we want to achieve. Is it worth it to kind of suck it up and live modestly for a period of time and really hammer away at those student loans And then you have the freedom, because you could make $500,000 a year. But if you have bills and debt that suck away most of that income, it doesn't matter how much you make, right? So the less you owe, the more you can enjoy your income. The less ways your paycheck's divvied up at the end of the day to stuff you have to pay for, the more freedom you have. Mm-hmm. So I think understanding, weighing the pros and cons and of doing things now that your future self will thank you for, I think that's where the power is. And everything is temporary. I work with a lot of families that have super big daycare bills, and it stinks. And it's like 2 mortgages, right? It's temporary. Everything is temporary. Let's get through it. Figure out a strategy to get through it while you, and that helps you to feel empowered. If you know it's temporary, you know it's not going to last forever, and you build a strategy around it, it helps you feel empowered, and you control your money versus your money controlling you.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. And I love what you're saying, because a bit of it is about flexibility and being able to, change what you're doing depending on what's financial situation you happen to be in that moment. But remembering that it isn't forever, because I do think, and maybe this stems from the old way of doing things too, you're supposed to kind of, put your money in buckets, get on the train and go. And never, it's very, it's a negative to change things or to stop doing something for a period of time. So I really like your approach on that, because that's realistic. That's life.
That's life, right? Yeah. We have to pivot and be flexible. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. I could talk to you all day. This has been great. And I love that, as a millennial, having clients that are millennials, I do think there's a bit of a problem with having older financial advisors with younger people. Sometimes there's a little disconnect there. So tell us a little about how people can find you, about your podcast, and.
Absolutely. If you want to learn more about my firm and how I work with my clients and what I believe in, you can go to greenwaywealthadvisory.com, greenwaywealthadvisory.com. My podcast is called Money CHIC, and CHIC stands for confident, healthy, informed, and capable when it comes to your money. So I talk about all types of personal finance topics. I really try to keep money talk approachable and fun and lighthearted, because who wants to talk to someone boring and dry about money? It can already be dry. So let's keep it as light and fun as we can. And I really want to feel like you're talking to your friend about this. I want to be your friend that knows a little bit about money that can help you.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's great. And really, we all do need mentors and advisors and people who do feel like friends that we can call when, those kind of stiff financial advisor relationships, they don't work very well, because you tend not to call and ask basic questions, so that's great.
Yes. I say if you're Googling money topics, that means you need to talk to an advisor. Yeah. And not every advisor is going to talk to you, right? Once you meet one advisor, you meet one advisor. Everyone's different, but find a couple that, you're intrigued by, date them, ask some questions, have an interview or two, and you'll get a feel. And your advisor should be one of the handful of people, whenever something major in your life happens, your advisor should be one of the first phone calls, because usually when something major happens, job loss, change jobs, move, have a baby, that impacts your money. So if you don't feel comfortable calling them, they're not the right person for you.
Yeah. That's great. I couldn't agree more. And it's been a real pleasure having you on today. I'm so excited that you were able to spend this time and share your knowledge and your wisdom. So thank you for that. And thank you for what you do in the world, helping people. And I hope, audience, that you will reach out and find Shari's podcast, Money CHIC, and connect with her. I know you can connect with her on LinkedIn, because I just put in a request this morning. So anyway, I really love talking about money. I hope you're getting a sense of how important and possibly fun it can be to talk about your money. It's a huge part of your life. And if you're not talking about it, you're not engaging with it quite enough. So thank you so much for listening to the Money and You Show. Please go on your podcast platform of choice and give us a review and a like, and share with your friends so we can bring great guests onto the show. So thank you. We'll see you next week.